So welcome once again to this webinar. I am with the Colorado Children's Campaign. We are a statewide policy and advocacy organization, and we're trying to secure every chance for every child. Really what this means is that we fight for wins for kids at the state capitol, whether that's more resources to support kids in schools or outside of schools, data, more policies to lift them up and get them where they need to go in life. That's what we're doing here at the Colorado Children's Campaign. And the data that we're about to review with you, we think of as one of the biggest wins that we've had for kids in Colorado for a long time, because this data is the first step toward a real state support system for the very real mental health needs of our kids, of all kids everywhere. We all deserve mental health and mental wellness, and it's just a little harder to come by these days. I'm very honored to be joined by the Colorado Department of Education. Johan and Jewel are the brains behind this operation. They took this really big directive from the state to create this data and these data profiles and turned it into something that we can all use to make things better for our kids. Thank you so much, Jewel and Johan, for your time and for your just good stewardship of this data. This is our agenda for today. We're going to do a quick refresher on the piece of legislation that sort of led to or created this data. Then I'm going to hand it to my friends at CDE to give a bit of an overview and a tutorial of the data dashboards. Johan is going to give us a couple of high-level insights that CDE has sort of already drawn from this data and some next steps that they're taking based on those insights. And then we're going to hear from a couple of school leaders about their perspectives on their district data and how the state can use this data to make things better for kids. Because we have a lot to get through and a lot to get to today, we're asking that folks wait for questions until the end of the webinar, after we've heard from our school leaders via the moderated Q&A. So at the bottom of your screen, there should be a place where you can click Q&A. You'll be able to enter your question, and Jewel, Johan, and I will do everything we can to get to as many of those questions as possible. So beginning with a quick refresh on House Bill 22-1376. In January of 2021, as I'm sure you all remember, we were all thinking a lot about student mental wellness and student mental health. We were in the height of the pandemic. School climate was really up in the air. And we were starting to see some of the data trends or some of the fallout of kids not being in classrooms anymore. In January of 2021, two organizations, the Aspen Institute and Excellent Ed, came together to create a policy book for, or a playbook for policymakers around crafting and creating positive school climates across states. So after that report came out, a lot of folks in Colorado, including Stand for Children, the Colorado Education Initiative, came together to form the School Climate Coalition, and we all worked together to pass House Bill 22-1376, which directed CDE to collect and report school climate data, or specifically data around absenteeism and discipline practices in schools. This data, like I said, is the first step that states can take in creating healthy, supportive, engaging school climates across the state for all students. Like I said, Johan and Jewel did all of the work over a 2-year really rigorous process to develop the systems and the procedures for collecting and reporting this data. And we're going to take a first look today at some of the data and some of the findings. We do need to remember that this is just the first collection and of the first step of this long journey that we're taking toward positive school climate for all kiddos. So it's not the time to make big judgments or come to big conclusions yet. We just don't have enough data over enough time. But we do have some first steps that we're excited to look through and talk through today. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen share and hand it to my friend Jewel.
Thanks, Maddie. Okay. All right, let me make sure. Perfect. Okay, so in order to access the district profile reports, you'll be getting a link in the chat for that. But you can, if you don't have the link, you can just type in CDE district profile reports, and then this dashboard will come up. So when you click on the dashboard, this is what you'll see. The big box in the middle there is just kind of telling you some background information about it and why it exists, as well as some additional instructions. And you'll see there are several buttons all throughout on the left-hand side as well as along the top. And the left-hand side shows all the required measures that had to be included in the reports. And along the top show the different levels of data. So there's a statewide version, a district level version, and a district comparison for each of the measures on the left. I also want to first point out the white buttons that you'll see on the left bottom and the top right, just so that you know that there are different pieces, different buttons you can click on as you view each piece of data that will give you different information. So the data description button will tell you what you're looking at, will give you definitions of things. The data sources will allow you to download the data if you want to look more into it yourself. The dashboard information will give you more information, kind of what Maddie just explained. The tutorial button, make sure to click on that in each section if you want some interpretation or help understanding each piece of the data. There's a video there that you can watch for each section. And then the questions button will populate the right person for whatever question you might have so that you can contact them to get more information. So I'm going to start by walking you through the chronic absenteeism tab and start there. So we'll start with the statewide version. So you'll kind of see just throughout that if there are any filters that can be applied to the dashboard, it will be in those gray boxes there. So you'll see the school year and student group are filters that can be applied. You'll see the top boxes there are showing you the chronic absenteeism rate, how many students that corresponds to, and then how that correlates to the total number of students, just to give you a better sense of what that percentage actually means. Then the box below those, the line graph there, shows you the percentage for the 3-year trend. And you can also change the student group if you want to look at a different demographic piece of information. The box on the right-hand side shows you similar information, but this is telling you each of those components, the number of students chronically absent, and then the rate for whatever demographic you want to select. So for example, if you wanted to look at some of those gaps we have between some of the attendance data, you might select total, and let's say you select special education. You can see in both charts that you'll see that the percentage is decreasing, but there's still gaps that exist between the total and some of those other groups. Moving into the district level section, you'll see that this throughout the statewide and district level are almost identical to each other. Other than that, there's the filters to select the district that you want to look at, and then it will show you the title there. So I won't go in depth in this one. It looks the same all throughout. But the district comparison I wanted to highlight, there are a couple different versions of this throughout the dashboard. This one is showing you a heat map based on each district that changes color based on their chronic absenteeism rate. So the higher the rate, the darker the percentage. So if you highlight over whichever district you want to be able to see, it'll give you more information there. And you can also on this right-hand side filter by if you want to see a specific county or a specific district, you can do that here. And then you can compare that to the state rate or whichever comparison here. So if you want to look at that are in the same county, you could do that. Or if you know that there's a district that has a similar demographic breakdown maybe, and you want to kind of see how their rates are comparing to yours, then you could do that there. Okay, so now I'm going to move into the discipline tab. So there are a couple different ones. The first one is discipline incidents. So this is just looking at how many behavior incidents occurred and then how many discipline actions occurred. So see on the boxes on the left-hand side are showing you, again, how many behavior incidents. So that's saying how many drug violations there were, how many bullying incidents there were, as an example. Compared to the discipline actions at the bottom is saying how many actions were there that followed from those behaviors. So how many suspensions were there, how many expulsions were there across the state in this case. Then the chart on the right-hand side here is crosswalking the behaviors with the actions. So it's telling you what were the actions that occurred across the state and what were the behaviors that came from those. And it's changing color based on frequency. So the darker colored boxes means that those things happen more often. So just as an example, I won't highlight over that, but for example, you can kind of see how many in-school suspensions were resulted from detrimental behavior as an example. If you highlight over any of these, I know they kind of are taking up my whole screen here, but you'll be able to see the behavior definition and action definition if you want to look more specifically into that. And again, filters can be applied if you want to look at a specific behavior incident or discipline action. For the district comparison on this one, this looks similar to the other discipline sections, but you'll see that there's the kind of the state, the county, and the district total. So if you want to look at a specific county and then also compare that to schools in the district, you can select those and it would change each of those numbers so that you can get a comparison to the state. And then also this one, if you want to, again, look at whatever districts you want to compare between, you can select all those here and you can either compare that to the state or other districts. And again, filters can be applied here as well. So in this sense, you can look at, if you're wanting to look at a specific, maybe like since out of school suspensions is a high proportion of discipline actions in the state, perhaps you want to drill down further into that category and see what behaviors are coming from that. So those are some of the insights you might be able to draw in this section. I'm going to move into student behavior. And so you'll see there's one that says student behavior and student discipline is below it. These are very similar to each other. Essentially, the only differences between them are that student behavior is looking at those behavior incidents, again, bullying, drug violation, etc., versus student discipline is looking at the actions that followed. So in these sections, they are looking at what types of students were involved. So the discipline incidents was just showing you what exactly occurred. Now the student sections are looking at what types of students were involved. So you'll see these boxes here. The first one is showing you the unique count of students. So that means how many distinct students were involved in a behavior incident. That means if a student was involved in a behavior incident more than once throughout the school year, they would still only be counted once in this box here. Compared to the total students involved in a behavior incident is showing you the total there. So if a student was involved in more than one discipline incident, then they would be counted twice in this middle box here, or more than once, I guess I should say. And then just to kind of give you a sense of how many students were involved in a behavior incident compared to the total number of students, that number is provided here as well. Moving into this box, the table on the right-hand side, this one again is showing you the behaviors. So whichever student group you want to select, you can see that here. This one is right now filtering by gender. So it's just showing you the breakdown of how many females versus non-binary students were received a first, second degree or vehicular assault as an example. So then you can kind of get that comparison. And it will show you percentages if you highlight over as well, and the definitions. Now the bar graph on the bottom is giving you an idea about any sort of overrepresentation between the students who are involved in the discipline collection compared to the total number of students. So as an example, if we look at this gender one, you'll see that males account for just over 50% of students in the population, compared to they represent about 70% of students who were involved in a discipline action in the last school year. District comparison looks very similar to the discipline incidents one. So again, you can filter by whichever districts that you want to select to kind of see maybe what other districts are doing, or if they're seeing improvements in certain areas or percentages that might be able to get some insights there. Again, discipline, we'll go through the student discipline one, just know that the only difference here is that it's looking at the discipline actions instead of the behaviors. Okay, the other actions. So other actions are included in the discipline collection, but these are all things that are not discipline actions, but they may have coincided with a discipline action. So those are things like those law enforcement referrals, school-related arrests, and student handcuffs are what we have in here. And this looks very similar to the other chart, just breaking it down by each student group. So if you want to look at what are the race ethnicity breakdown of students who received a law enforcement referral, as an example. Then you could do that and kind of get a better sense there. And again, you can see the percentages as well. So then you can get make any insights for that. And all the other tabs look similar to the others. Next is service provider ratios. So this is looking at how many students were served by each special service provider or mental health professional. So we have for that school counselors, school psychologists, school nurses, and school social workers. And so then it's just telling you the high level total, how many students were served by each professional in those boxes on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side is then telling you the deeper information about it, of how many students there were, how many positions there are in the state, and then what that ratio corresponds to. For if you want to kind of get a sense of how the state is doing in that area, the data description has a component that tells you what the national recommended ratios are from each national organization to be able to look further into that. For this district comparison, it has another heat map like the chronic absenteeism. So that's showing you the darker color means it has a denser ratio. So there would be there would be more students per school counselor, as an example. And then it's showing you another line graph. This collection has been in existence for 2 years now, so we only have a 2-year trend at the moment, but that's what you can draw there. And then you can, again, compare between districts as you please. Okay, for school climate survey, we do not have information on this right now. We will have information after the release of the report card March data. This will have information regarding which school districts administer district-wide school climate survey, if they publish their results online, and then if they do, we provide a link. There won't be the actual results on this dashboard, but it will provide you the link to access that information. And then lastly are the other measures. So these pictures here just show different measures that are also related to the learning environment, either statewide ones or national ones. So you'll see the TLCC, Civil Rights Data Collection, Healthy Kids Colorado Survey, and the YRBS, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. So if you click on any of those pictures or icons, it will bring you to that page so that you can digest the data further and look more into that. So that's just another feature that we have there. And I think I made it through all that. So I will pass it to Johan now with the rest of our slides.
Great, thanks, Joel. Hi, everyone. My name is Johan Lindgren. I'm the director of our Dropout Prevention and Student Reengagement Office at CDE. And Jewel and I are working on a bunch of things related to some of these data and obviously some of the practices that go along that many schools and districts are working on in terms of impacting and setting up really strong learning environments. I'm just going to spend a few minutes and share a little bit of overview, kind of context from what we're seeing at the state level as some of this data comes out. You can go to the next slide. And I'll just kind of walk through each of the different categories that Jewel mentioned. So the first one that we saw is related to attendance or chronic absenteeism. And so for folks who have not followed this as closely, we define chronic absenteeism as the percentage of kids that are missing 10% or more of school. We use it as a good measure to see how many kids are impacted or might have their learning impacted by attendance. So the positive news in attendance is that we're seeing good improvement. So we have seen this, the chart you see on the left-hand side, we see our average daily attendance rate has improved since the 21-22 school year. And on the right-hand side, you see our chronic absenteeism has improved since the 21-22 school year. The challenge in both of those is that you see that we're not quite back to where we were pre-pandemic. So we still have a high number of kids impacted by attendance and really trying to do the work to re-engage and reconnect more and more students. You can go to the next. The second thing I'll share around attendance is that, again, in the positive news, we've had improvement across schools, districts, grade levels, and student groups. Almost every disaggregated group that we look at improved in the last school year. So that's the positive news. The challenge, again, in this is that we see some variation between those different ones. So the chart on the left-hand side, this is by grade level. And so you can see that there's almost a U-shaped trend where kindergarten is higher. We go down. 4th and 5th grade is kind of our best attendance grades, and then we go up towards high school. So you have this a little bit of a unique space where kindergarten and 9th through 12th grade are our kind of our lowest attendance categories. And you think about what a kindergartner needs versus what an 11th or 12th grader needs for improving attendance, and those are might be very different things. And we see it similarly with student groups. Again, we've seen improvement, but if you see that chart on the right-hand side, the dotted black line is our statewide, and then some of our student groups. So for instance, our students who are homeless or students who have an individualized education plan, we do see a gap between those groups and our statewide rates. You can go to the next. You also saw in there that Jewel showed some of the special service provider ratios. So we have just started tracking this one and calculating a rate at the state. And so again, the dark blue is 22-23, and then orange is 23-24. So again, you can see that the rates have gone down, so you would want them to be lower, so you have fewer students per every staff member in those roles. However, the dotted black lines, some of the national associations connected with those different roles have recommended levels. And so you can see that we're above those recommended levels for those, even though that has reduced over time within the state. You can go to the next. And then the other one, and so there are 4 different surveys that Jewel mentioned here, and other information that I think is some good information. The other one that I would add is that many of our schools and districts are using some type of climate survey. These are not collected at a statewide level, but many schools and districts are using them to get a better understanding of how kids are interacting with that, how parents feel about their connection to school. And so those are things often available locally that I think are helping give folks an understanding on those. So we'll post here whether or not a school or whether or not a district has those. And if they do post them publicly, you could access it from here. Otherwise, you might go directly to a district and ask if they are using some version of a climate survey. You can go to the next. And then I just wanted to share a few things on the discipline and behavior collection. This is a new version of the collection in this school year. And I will just acknowledge that it is one of the more complex data collections and data sources that we have at the department. And so wanted to share a couple of things as we look at that. Given that it is a new collection this year, or a new format for the collection, in most cases, we are really encouraging folks to look at this as and not in direct comparison to previous data. Because in many of those cases, it could be a variety of different things that are impacting a trend that you're seeing there. Could be a change in practice and how approaching behavior, could be a change in behavior itself, or some of it could be how we are collecting some of that. So we're really encouraging folks to treat this separately in some spaces and try to better understand the data you're seeing, but that comparison to previous years might not be as helpful. And then the other thing is that we have had a lot of interest in looking at comparisons to student population. So are there student groups that are overrepresented within discipline or behavior data? Or are we seeing this in between those? So we do have a couple of those, but again, they are not an exact comparison. And so again, we're asking folks that could be helpful information, but we want folks to be cautious with that analysis as well. You can go to the next. All right, and then the second part that I will share, there is a new requirement to include seclusion and restraint data within this. As you may have seen, we did not currently publish that within the district profile reports. When looking at the data that came in this year, as well as a collection on use of restraint that it is also required. We noticed some differences between those, and we wanted to make sure before we were publishing that we had an accurate understanding, and we were publishing accurate data within that. So we have not published that right now. We are in the process of interacting with districts and making sure we understand what was reported this year and looking at how we will update guidance and potentially those collections for the next year to ensure we can publish and share accurate data for the next year. I'm actually going to have you go to the next one, Jewel. Okay. So with the discipline and behavior collection, we created this example just to try to show why you might see some different numbers in different spaces. So the discipline and behavior collection would have an incident with it. So these are three different scenarios. So I will take you starting with the blue bars at the top there and kind of work my way through them. So the first incident example had, so incident number 45, had two students involved, student A and student B. The behavior that was indicated was bullying for both of those. And then lastly, there was actions, so an out-of-school suspension for one student and an in-school suspension for a second. And then the second incident, number 46, you can see one student, student C, one behavior, marijuana violation, and then one discipline action, out-of-school suspension. And then if you go to the last one, incident 47, you have student A. The behavior is a dangerous weapon. And then you have two discipline actions, so an out-of-school suspension and then a referral for expulsion. So you can see in the orange along the bottom that you could end up with different numbers for this. So you have three incidents, 4 times that a student was involved, but you can see that student A actually is in there twice. You have 4 different behaviors that resulted in that, and then 5 discipline actions. So along that, you will see that there are different numbers for each of those categories. So when you look at the overall trends, you might see some differences and variation there. You can go to the next. All right, so the first category is behavior incidents, and this tries to capture basically each of the different behaviors that happened throughout. There's 103,000 total of them. There are 16 different categories that could fit for those behaviors. And you can see that the majority of them, about 75%, fall under 3 categories that are detrimental behavior, disobedient or defiant, or interference, and then other violations or code of conduct. That would be something that's detailed in a district's discipline policy. And then the others are spread throughout the other ones. So we have a concentration in those kind of 3 behaviors with the majority of the behaviors. You can go to the next. In terms of discipline actions, you can see that the vast majority of actions are out of school and in school suspensions. So that's the dark blue and the orange. And there is much smaller for each of the other categories, including expulsion, which is a small portion, but still a substantial number of students within that. Go to the next. And then lastly, in terms of students that are involved, so there were 64,000 unique students who were involved. So you can see that when you compare that to the number of incidents or discipline actions, that there were quite a few of these students who were involved in more than one incident. So it's actually a smaller number of students total, but involved in multiple incidents. And we see this in a couple of different spaces. And then the second thing that Jewel mentioned as well, when we look at comparison of students, their percentage of students who are involved in a discipline action compared to their overall population. So we're trying to make some comparison between is a group overrepresented, and you can see that there are scenarios where students are overrepresented within the discipline connection or collection in comparison to the population. The one on the screen is disaggregated by race and ethnicity. So you can see that the yellow chart there is showing Hispanic or Latino students, and which is 47% of the students involved in discipline, compared to a smaller group, 36% in the population as a whole. Next one. And then lastly, we are doing a fair amount of work on these. We've talking today about the data collection and use of data. So are really digging into that and how folks are using and understanding data. We're also doing and gotten, most of our requests are interested in how do we think about implementation of discipline, and I think most importantly, prevention-based systems of how we support student behavior and support student engagement. So our team really works on both sides of this in trying to help districts to implement different practices and be able to improve the learning environment that they have for kids. With that, I will pass it to Maddie.
Thanks so much, Johan and Jewel. That was very helpful. I'm going to share my screen and welcome our district leader voices. Let me get into the correct mode. There we go. So I'm very pleased and honored to be introducing these three school and district leaders. Dr. Leslie Nichols is the superintendent in the Gunnison Watershed District. Mr. Kirk Henwood is the superintendent in the South Route School District. And then we also have Dino Reyes Jr., who is the Dean of Students at Lake Middle School here in Denver. I have a couple of questions for these folks. We've got about 10, 15 minutes. Before I ask those questions, I'm going to have John make sure that our three speakers are unmuted and ready to speak. And I'm going to remind our speakers to maybe slow down their pace a little so that our interpreter can keep up. She's been asking for that support. So Dr. Nichols, are you with us?
I am, thank you.
Thanks so much for being here. We'll start with you. Tell us what your district data is saying to you as a superintendent who has worked in schools, who works with students. How is this data useful to you?
Thanks, Maddie, for including me in the conversation. I just had some really basic observations. It says that, like the rest of the state, our attendance needs attention, and our kids who come to us with various risk factors have bigger struggles with attendance than others, and so those gaps are persistent in our district, like everywhere. When it comes to discipline, it says that we, as the adults in our district, may not understand the difference between first, second, and third degree assault, but I think that points to a bigger issue with the discipline reporting, that the language in our code of conduct and in our student handbooks doesn't match the language that CDE uses for discipline reporting. And so my assistant principals who handle this work, and I have regular turnover in those positions, like I'm sure many of us do, aren't able to distinguish exactly what the reportable categories are. says that boys are disciplined far more than girls. And I don't know, CDE just shared the disproportionality among ethnicity and special education. I couldn't see that because of the way it was reported. It just said, it didn't have like students in special education and students not in special education and comparisons that I could find. So those are a few of my observations.
Thank you, Dr. Nichols. I think you're highlighting something that's really important to keep in mind about this data, which is this was our first try, our first stab at getting this all on paper and in one place in a way that made sense and was respectful of students and districts. So having that context, I think, is important. Mr. Kirk Henwood, if you're with us, same question. What did your district data say to you about what's going on in South Route?
Thanks for having me. I think, yeah, one of the things that really jumps out is similar to what Dr. Nichols said, and that is the context and the descriptors that administrators use for discipline. While they have a clear definition, there's still some subjectivity. And so consistency is going to be important, and we're small enough. We're very small. We have 2 principals and a dean of students. We can have that conversation to make sure that we're aligned in when we say classroom disruption versus say detrimental behavior. What do we mean by that? And are we on the same page of what triggers those? So I think that's going to be a big part of our conversation, because if we're going to be able to use the data and we want the data to be accurate, we got to make sure we're classifying behaviors in a consistent fashion. We also had a discrepancy between males and females, so gives us something to look at and how we're managing that. We did not have any expulsions, and we had very, in fact, let me look at my discipline incidents, and we only had 7 in-school suspensions for big issues, I guess is a way to put it. And so, you know, we really do try to look at alternatives to out-of-school suspension and especially expulsion. Our philosophy, and I think a similar philosophy to with a lot of my colleagues, is we're trying to teach kids different behaviors or better behaviors, I guess would be one way to put it. And having kids out of school in the home environment doesn't necessarily do that. So we look for alternatives inside our system. But in small rural school districts, that also presents certain challenges just given resources and availability. So that's kind of what our data said to us. We have some work to do, but I also think overall it's pretty positive for us. So.
Thank you so much, Kirk. One more follow-up question for you, and then we'll turn back to Leslie. So how do you think about success in like one of these 3 areas, student absenteeism, school climate, or student discipline? What does success in that area in your school district look like? And how could we see that success reflected in this data?
Yeah, that's a very complex question. We do environmental data, school environment data, just to see what our kids are telling us, what our students are telling us. And then we act on that data of what makes kids feel safe, comfortable, willing to learn. And so one of those measures would be, and I don't know that you'd necessarily see it here, but one of the things we try to really focus on is when you walk into one of our environments, whether that's the school bus, the cafeteria, the commons, or a classroom, that it's inviting, it's positive, and we're trying to help kids learn. And so around that concept of what are we trying to do for kids and data, we do try to track that to some degree. We also use a variety of, I mean, people call them sort of alternative, but we have restorative practices that we've incorporated into our school district. And so when we have disagreements or challenges amongst kids or between staff and kids, we try to have an environment where we can rationally discuss challenges and problems and come up with solutions that are win-win for all. They're not always win-win, but we always try to shoot for win-win. Again, that's hard to measure some of those, but we feel like if we're doing those things well, how that translates into student behavior and discipline incidents and discipline reporting, those numbers should trend down over time if we're doing a good job.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And one more question for Dr. Nichols. Leslie, what resources, at the state level, so think like funding or policies, or what community support, so think things like parents helping, parents adopting a different mindset, what kinds of things would be most helpful to you as a superintendent as you're working to improve school climate across your districts? How can we help?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate this question a lot. I know that some years ago when state law was passed to prohibit suspension of kids younger than 3rd grade, there was a lot of uproar from my rural colleagues. And I was surprised because I was like, oh, that's just good early childhood, philosophy. Those kids need to learn behavior, not be punished for hard behaviors. But then I came to understand that so many of us in rural Colorado do not have the resources to manage really challenging behaviors. And that is kind of at the core of what I'd like to see with this whole effort. I'm understanding more about why this dashboard was part of the law that got passed, but what really, it's frustrating because we don't have resources just for the data reporting, much less all the actions that we need to take. And some of those resources would be if the state could instead, like we provide model academic standards, if the state could provide model climate standards. And here's funding to hit targets like robust restorative practices implementation in districts and schools, strong positive behavior intervention support programs in schools, learning that's rooted in relationships, teachers who have outstanding classroom climate and management skills because they're paid more to have more days in their contract so they can get trained in what is quality standard 2 for teachers. Excellent family communication methods. In my own district, I would love a communication specialist to reach families way better than I'm able and even better than my principals are able. Family liaisons, a whole host of them would be great. That might be along the lines of social workers. We don't have any of those in my district. The work of my assistant principals is sometimes different roles in different schools and districts, but I could double or even triple the number I have to hold restorative practices work in each of their schools, which is all about communication and conversations and relationships. And that type of preventative and it is reactive work as well. When things go wrong, it takes time. Time equals more people and more money. Attendance officers would be great. More counselors would be great. Culturally and linguistically diverse teachers and staff would be great. And then in my community, wow, it would be great to have more funding for food assistance, housing assistance, employment assistance, navigating immigration, legal services. These are things that schools can't be the everything for, but our communities, I know everywhere could sure use, and in rural areas, I think the need is often even more stark. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nichols. That's really helpful. There's a lot there that I think that we can do and that we can help with. So now we're going to turn to Mr. Dino Reyes. As I said, he is the Dean of Students at Lake Middle School. I had the honor and privilege of visiting Lake Middle School a few weeks ago, and it really was a cool and special place. So Dino, go ahead and come off mute and tell us how you've thought about rebuilding Lake Middle School's climate, what that work has looked like, and then maybe tell us a little bit about how that work is paying off in higher test scores, lower absenteeism rates, and awesome student behaviors.
Thank you, Maddie. Hello, everybody. My name is Dino Reyes Jr. This is my 7th year here at Lake Middle School, my 15th year here at the district. and DPS. Super honored to be a part of this conversation. So to answer the question, when I come into a school, this is my third school that I've been fortunate to be a part of. All three have been Title I settings, and I've been overseeing culture in every one. And so when I come into a situation like Lake Middle School, my first objective is to define identity. Just recognizing that what the narrative and the community reputation was here about our school, and historically how it's been. I came here, my aunts and uncles came here, and so like it's always had to be honest, it's had a bad reputation. And so when I go into that, recognizing that, okay, how can we flip this with the work that we're going to do and also prove? So defining our identity, being Lake Knights, started with our weekly assemblies. I have weekly assemblies where we talk about what it means to be a knight and knightly virtue. So I have a monthly theme, a monthly virtue that we talk about every week. It could be anything from like courage to forgiveness to gratitude, leadership, family, stuff like that. And the last week of the month, the last assembly of the month, we'll have a knighting ceremony where students vote for students and they vote for staff members on who they feel like embodies them traits and them virtues. And we ask outside community members to come in who we also feel like are attached to that particular virtue, and they give a little testimonial, and then they knight students with a real sword, and we create like this whole cool like ceremonial vibe. It's really fun for the students, and it's also the highest award that you could receive here at Lake Middle School. So that's just part of it. We use Game of Thrones themes to be fun. And the other thing is that we've done to define our identity was our values, internalizing them, not just using our values as like posters on the wall, stuff like that, but truly embodying them as much as possible, cultivating them within our own personal lives outside of the building. So our 4 values, for example, are honor, humility, hard work, and generosity. And so we want to make sure that we're elevating that, promoting that in a good way, and also like with style and substance. And so the other thing is when we come in, just trying to have our staff members campaign for fellowship and buy-in. So when we approach the students, it doesn't matter where you're coming from or what your particular background is as a staff member. We still want to recognize that everything that we do falls under the umbrella of our values, and then from there we just try to really approach things with culturally responsive programming. So when I first came in here, we had only gym and music and art, traditional art, and which is cool. That's awesome. We wanted to just create something, add to it. So we went ahead and had our Denver DJ school. We partnered with the Denver DJ school. So now we offer the art of DJing. We offer a radio podcasting, and also music production, digital music production. We built a barbershop in our school. We went ahead and create and just brought other people from the community that are experts in their craft, that are willing to come and serve, to come and teach through what is that? Is CTE. And then we have like photography and American Sign Language, other just different stuff that the students could just have options, and also being intentional with our talent acquisition, bringing people in that are from the community, from the neighborhood, that are familiar with just the culture, and then also delivering like whatever their passion is. That's when we go about generosity. We want you to share your gifts with the community, and we start with the staff. So never losing sight of building excellence in community, athletics, arts and entertainment, and obviously academics. And so that's just kind of, I know I said a lot, but I could go on and on about how we've, where we started and how we're continuing to try to build and cultivate the school community.
Thank you so much, Dino. That is really helpful. I'm just going to repeat the second half of that question. Can you tell us about some of the successes and the wins that you've seen at your school recently because of this school climate work? And just a quick reminder, Valentina, our interpreter, is working hard. So as much as you can slow down.
Sure.
And be
I'm
kind to
sorry.
her.
Yeah, thank you, Valentina. I just know I have a lot to share, and I was trying to be efficient. So, okay, but in regard to the payoff, it's been a special thing, because when I first came in, we had our enrollment was 235 students, and now we are at 630 students. So that to me just implied community trust. Like I said, changing the narrative with the community and building that trust with them, where through social media, making videos and YouTube channels that that show off and highlight the amazing things that we're doing. Humbly speaking, man, it's just like really trying to promote just the goodness about a new brand, rebranding everything and our approach and style to it. And it's also paid off, thankfully, just recently with our scores. You know, and what we did when it comes to the state tests and everything else, we just told the truth. You know, when people talk about scores, they forget to mention that it doesn't define you as and your brilliance as a person, as a student. So, you know, we've been programmed to worry. Like even for me, when I was in elementary, all the way through through school, it was always like this cloud of anxiety when it was time for the test, and this fear about approaching the test. And so what we wanted to do is just be honest about it and let them know that, you know, we recognize that this is a performance, and it's not a reflection about everything you know. So just because, like, for instance, Nikola Jokic, for example, if he has a bad game, that doesn't mean that he's a bad player. He just had, you know, he struggled in one particular performance. And so we got to make sure that we're messaging to students like, yo, this is a performance. This is not a reflection of who you are and how brilliant you are, but like how we can, everything that we learn to reflect in this approach, which is the test. And also applying the street grit to these things, because we have this innate, you know, grit coming from an urban culture that, you know, we're not afraid of walk the streets late at night when we're going home, crossing Colfax or something like that. But then when it comes to the test, there's this like huge fear and like shutting down. And so just kind of flipping that and approaching it in a different way, you know, and also we've been able to like lower our absenteeism rates as well. Thankfully, just again, like I said, being intentional with our talent acquisition, bringing people in that, because like I can give everybody a cool playbook, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to execute it. So I have all these cool ideas and everything, but just really being intentional on finding the right humble person that's going to be willing to, that already could connect with students, but also like on top of that, using their whatever their subject or the topic that they're teaching as the avenue to just connect and be life mentors. So and not just bringing the cool, like I said, but also bringing the substance. You know, making sure that and you're when you see the buy-in take place and then the trust build, because, you know, as we all know, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So really just doing more than just what's in our basic scope of work. And so making sure that the staff members are investing in students outside of just their classroom. And then you could see that pay off in student behaviors. And also like making sure that our staff members are being recognized of who they are actually in the community. So for instance, one of our teachers is a locally famous DJ. We call him by the DJ name, you know, Mr. So-and-so. Like our art teacher is a professional artist in the community, calling her by that name. And so that way when you're going to see him at Target or or, you know, at any restaurant or something like that, they are still known by who they are. So that just kind of creates this comfortability within the students and the families on how they're engaging with the staff. So, but yeah, I mean, just bringing that same energy that the outside world would consider inappropriate, but we're trying to keep it right and righteous and good and kind and humble. So just trying to make what people would assume is cool, but making sure that we're bringing all the good things about that, you know, not just on the surface, you know.
You know, thank you so much for all that context. That's really helpful. Keeping it right, keeping it righteous. It's going to be my new saying. So we have time for exactly one really good question that Dr. Nichols raised. I'm going to answer this live, and Johan and Jewel feel welcome to jump in and correct me. But the question is, why the originating legislation for this data required student or asked for student level data. And my understanding of that question and my attempt at an answer is to say that to be able to understand the gaps or the disparities in which type and what kind of students are being disciplined or facing disciplinary action, we have to be able to disaggregate and get down to that student level. I don't think anyone, certainly not me, certainly not anyone at the Children's Campaign, is wanting to weaponize this data, wanting to create a system where a kiddo is kind of stuck with a long disciplinary record that, you know, that we can see at the state level. Every interaction of this type, every disciplinary action is very personal and very tense and very fraught. And the state doesn't need to know all of those details, but with the disaggregated data, with that student level data, we're able to tell clearer stories about which students are facing what kind of discipline. I hope that answered. We are officially over time. I want to remind everyone that we are always around for questions. You can reach me at madeline@coloradokids.org. Please reach out, please email if there's anything we didn't get to. Thanks so much for your time today. Thanks again to our school and district leaders for being here and sharing their perspective. And we will catch you on the next Colorado Children's Campaign webinar.